Okay, so you've definitely heard the word blockchain. It gets thrown around all the time, right? People call it revolutionary, some say it's dangerous, others think it's the next internet. But to really get what it's all about, we need to cut through all that hype and talk about something much more basic, something deeply human: trust. So let's start with a big question, a really big one. What if you could send money to a friend, sign a major contract, or even just prove who you are, without a bank, a lawyer, or a government stamping their approval on it? I mean, what if we could actually build a world without all the traditional gatekeepers? That, right there, is the huge problem blockchain was invented to solve.
Now, to really understand why that's such a wild idea, we first need to take a step back and look at the world we're all living in right now. Because our world is, in fact, built on trust. Just a very specific kind of trust. Trust in big, central authorities.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We trust banks to keep our money safe. We trust governments to issue our passports and keep track of who owns what. We even trust these massive tech companies to manage our private data and our social lives. These guys are the trusted middlemen, and let's be honest, our entire society would pretty much grind to a halt without them.
But it's not a perfect system, is it? Not by a long shot. These middlemen, they all take a cut. We call them fees. Their centralized databases can be hacked, which creates one single catastrophic point of failure. And, there's always the huge risk that these powerful groups could abuse the very trust we give them. The bottom line is our whole trust infrastructure is kind of fragile.
So it was exactly because of these weak spots that a new and pretty radical solution started to take shape. A way to create trust without having to rely on a central institution. A system that, funny enough, is often called trustless.
All right, let's go back in time. The year is 2009. The whole world is still recovering from the 2008 financial meltdown. And out of nowhere, this mysterious person, or maybe a group of people nobody knows, using the name Satoshi Nakamoto, drops a paper online. It describes something called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And this was the world's very first glimpse of the engine that made it run, blockchain.
So, Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. And what does that even mean? Well, unlike the dollars or euros in your pocket, it's not backed by a government. It's not controlled by a bank. Instead, all of its security comes from a huge network of computers all working together, using cryptography, which is really just a fancy way of saying super complex math, to check and double-check every single transaction.
And that right there, that is the absolute core promise of this whole thing. It's a system for what you might call trustless trust. It's kind of weird, I know, but it means you don't have to trust the stranger you're sending money to, and you don't have to trust a bank sitting in the middle. The only thing you have to trust is the code. You just have to trust the math.
Okay, that sounds great in theory, but how on earth does this machine actually work? I mean, how can a bunch of computers, scattered all over the world, that don't know each other, possibly agree on anything without some boss telling them what to do?
Well, it really all comes down to three key pillars. First up is the distributed ledger. So instead of one master copy of the records, like in a bank, everyone on the network has their own identical copy. Second, there's a consensus mechanism. This is just the set of rules the network uses to agree on what's true and how to update all those ledgers together. And third, you've got smart contracts. These are basically just little computer programs that run automatically when certain conditions are met, kind of like a super-powered vending machine.
So let's quickly walk through a transaction. Say you want to send some Bitcoin. Your request gets blasted out to the whole network. Then, these powerful computers called miners all race to be the first to solve a really hard math puzzle to validate your transaction. The winner gets to add a new block of transactions to the chain, and they get a little reward for their work. But here's the most important part. Every new block is cryptographically sealed to the one before it. So to change anything in the past, you'd have to resolve all the puzzles for all the blocks that came after it. It's basically impossible. And that's what makes the blockchain permanent and tamper-proof.
But all that security? It comes at a cost, and that cost is speed, because this whole process of everyone agreeing on everything is, well, it's slow. The Bitcoin network can process maybe 7 transactions a second. 7. Now compare that to the Visa network. We're talking thousands. It's not even in the same league. And this scalability problem is still one of the biggest hurdles for blockchain.
So, this trust machine, it sounds brilliant on paper, right? Almost perfect. But what happens when its cold, logical code smacks right into our messy, unpredictable human world? Well, back in 2016, a huge crisis did just that, and it put the entire philosophy of blockchain on trial.
It was this wild experiment called the DAO, which stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Just think of it like a venture capital fund that had no CEO, no managers, no board. It was run completely by software code. It raised a staggering $150 million, but then, disaster. An attacker found a tiny loophole in the code and started draining money out, siphoning off more than $50 million.
And this is where things get really tricky, philosophically speaking. See, the DAO was built on one radical, uncompromising principle. The code is the law. What that means is, if the software let you do something, then it was, by definition, legal and fair. The attacker wasn't breaking any rules. They were just using the code exactly as it was written in a way no one ever imagined.
So this created an impossible choice. I mean, what do you do? If the whole point of blockchain is that it's unchangeable, and if the code is the final word on everything, do you just stand by and let a thief walk away with 50 million bucks? Or do you step in and manually fix it, breaking the single most sacred rule of the entire system?
In the end, the community chose a very messy, very human solution. They did something called a hard fork. It was basically like hitting a reset button and rewinding the entire blockchain to the moment right before the attack, making it as if the theft never even happened. It worked. The money was returned. But it proved a critical point. Even a so-called perfect trust machine needs human judgment when things go wrong.
And that whole crazy story brings us right to the main idea here. The thesis is that for this technology to really truly work in the real world, the rigid black and white world of code needs a partner, an unlikely partner, the flexible, nuanced, and very human world of law.
Probably the best way to think about this is dry code versus wet code. Dry code is the software on the blockchain. It's incredibly fast, totally automated, and super precise. It does exactly what you program it to do, no questions asked. But wet code, well, that's our legal system. And it's built for all the stuff code just can't handle, like nuance, figuring out what someone's intent was, and providing a fix when things inevitably go sideways.
So the future isn't about choosing one over the other. It's about building a bridge between the two. We can make code more like law by using things called oracles, which are basically trusted sources that feed real-world information into the blockchain. And we can make law more like code by creating things like regulatory sandboxes, which are safe spaces for people to test new ideas without breaking a bunch of old rules.
So when you put it all together, it's pointing toward a really fascinating future. One where our whole idea of trust becomes this incredible hybrid, blending the cold, hard certainty of math with messy but essential human wisdom. And that's really the ultimate goal here. Look, blockchain isn't going to suddenly create some techno-utopia that gets rid of all our banks and governments. Its real power, its true potential, is in building a smarter, more robust layer on top of the systems we already have. It's about using the power of code to make our world more efficient, more transparent, and more secure.
Of course, finding that perfect balance is the million-dollar question. As one legal expert put it, too much law could stifle the blockchain or drive it underground, yet so could too little law. It's this incredibly delicate dance between encouraging innovation and making sure people are protected.
Which really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We know that code is unbelievably powerful. It can execute millions of commands in a split second without ever making a mistake. And we know that law, for all of its flaws, holds centuries of wisdom about fairness and human nature. The biggest question we face over the next decade is this: can we figure out how to successfully combine the two and build a future of trust that's better than anything the world has ever seen before?